This video will go over how to administer early literacy measures for kindergarten. Here are some guidelines to use when students are taking fluency-based measures. Students can become frustrated when pushed too quickly through items. Conversely, students who are struggling can also become discouraged when stuck on difficult items. Furthermore, some tasks lend themselves to faster response rates, like letter naming fluency, while others average slower response rates due to the task of cognitive load, like oral reading fluency. An examiner who is familiar with the student is in the best position to determine whether he or she understands the task and is reasoning through an answer, or the student is struggling and should move on. In general, unless otherwise noted, wait about 3 to 5 seconds for an answer is an appropriate amount of time in most situations. Examiners are encouraged to use their professional judgment on a case-by-case basis. Here are some general rules. If a student clearly does not know the answer with a fluency measure, mark the item as incorrect and move to the next item after 3 to 5 seconds. If a student is sounding out or subvocalizing in letter-word sound fluency or oral reading fluency measures, mark the item as incorrect and move on to the next item after about 10 seconds has elapsed with no correct response. More information on this can be found in the Administration and Scoring Guide. Early literacy measures are administered to students in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. However, measures can be used for progress monitoring at any grade level. Not all early literacy measures are administered in every season and every grade. This table shows the seasonal screening timeline for administering the early literacy measures. These are also the seasons during the national norms were collected. Testing time is brief, about 7 to 12 minutes for benchmarking, depending on the grade and the season. So all assigned measures should be administered to students in a single testing session. Next, we'll cover the early literacy measures further. Details about each of the measures are included in the administration and scoring tutorials, as well as guides and manuals available in the help file on aimsweb Plus. Let's start with some general information about aimsweb early literacy assessments. aimsweb Plus provides dedicated item sets exclusive for universal screeners. The assessments are all graded to be at similar difficulty within each grade level set, and all the measures are individually administered. There are multiple alternative forms per grade level for frequent progress monitoring, up to 23 different test forms for screening and progress monitoring. The number of forms varies by measure depending on the season administered and the corresponding progress monitoring periods available. We will now cover each of the early literacy measures, including what each measures, things to keep in mind, and how to administer and score. Initial Sounds is a 12-item untimed test administered to kindergarten students in the fall and winter benchmark periods. This measure assesses a student's ability to match a word with the initial sound made by the examiner, receptive, and the ability to produce an initial sound when a word is spoken, expressive. Isolating and producing first sounds of a word is a valuable pre-reading skill. Pictures used in the measure are familiar to most very young children, and the examiner also provides a name for each picture before asking about the word sounds. The student sees a row of 4 pictures on each test page and hears the examiner name each picture. Then, the student either points to the picture of the word and matches the initial sound the examiner makes, or produces the initial sound of the word spoken by the examiner. The first 2 items of each test page are receptive, point to the one that starts with, and the other 2 pictures are expressive. What sound does blank start with? To administer initial sounds, you will need the initial sounds printed test forms for the students, and the administrator will need the digital record form, which can be accessed on the computer or electronic tablet. The digital record form will contain the standardized directions. Place the student test page in front of the student in order so that only the first page is visible. You can ensure that the pages on the digital record form will match the student page by clicking the Preview button. Click to begin. on the digital record form. For each page, first point to all 4 pictures on the student's form, and for each one say, "This is," point to each picture and say the name provided on the initial sounds digital record form. Follow the directions and ask questions in order as shown on the initial sounds digital record form screen. Follow along on the digital record form, clicking the check marks if correct and the X if incorrect. To access the subsequent pages on the digital record form, click the page number at the bottom of the screen. After the items are administered, you will be prompted to click the scoring button at the upper right-hand corner. This will then display the results on screen and auto-populate them to a report. When administering initial sounds, there are things you'll need to keep in mind. Allow about 3 to 5 seconds for students to respond to the questions before marking them incorrect and going on to the next question. There is no discontinue rule on initial sounds. Do not penalize students for regional dialects or articulation problems, and students receive 1 point for meeting the criteria for each question. Letter naming fluency is a time measure that is administered during all benchmark periods for kindergarten year. This measure assesses the student's knowledge of upper and lowercase letter names. Knowing letter names is an essential pre-literacy skill. The student sees rows of letters and names as many as possible in 1 minute. This measure, as well as all time measures, looks for automaticity of skills. Automaticity is the precursor for mastering more complex and higher order skills. To administer letter naming fluency, you will need the letter naming fluency printed test form for the students, and the administrator will need the letter naming fluency digital record form, which can be accessed on a computer or electronic tablet. The digital record form will contain standardized directions for test items. A timer will be present in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and errors will be marked by simply clicking on the letter. When the timer expires, you will be prompted to pick the last letter the student said, and then the results will appear on screen and auto-populate to the reports. Place the letter naming fluency test page in front of the students. You can preview to ensure that the page on the digital record form will match the student's page by clicking the preview button. Say, "Here are some letters." Point to the first letter. "Begin here and tell me the name of as many letters as you can." Moving to the next screen of directions by clicking on the right arrow to advance to the next screen of directions. Say, "Put your finger under the first letter. Ready? Begin." Click Begin on the digital record form when the student says the first letter, not when you say begin. Follow along with the digital record form by clicking the items that were incorrectly answered or skipped. If a student skips an entire row of letters, redirect by pointing to the first letter in that skipped row and say, if needed, "This one is next." When the digital record form indicates that it has been 1 minute, say stop and click the last item attempted. Make sure any necessary scoring adjustments are made and then click on to the score and then OK. When administering letter naming fluency, there are things you'll need to keep in mind. Allow about 3 to 5 seconds for students to name letters before saying the letter name and marking it incorrect. Then point to the next letter and say, "What letter?" You may give this corrective feedback as often as needed. No other feedback is permitted. If the student self-corrects an error within 3 seconds, mark as correct. If a student incorrectly names 10 consecutive letters without self-correcting, discontinue administration. If the student says the letter sound, the first time, "Tell me the letter name," you may say. Then record the second response. Only offer the reminder once during the administration. If the student makes the letter sound again, mark that item as incorrect and do not give feedback. If a student skips an entire row of letters, Redirect by pointing to the first letter of the skipped row and say, "This one is next." Students receive 1 point for each correctly named letter. Do not penalize for the following things: a response for I or L for a lowercase l, self-corrections made within 3 seconds, regional dialects, or articulation problems. Letter names are considered incorrect if a letter sound is made rather than the name after giving corrective feedback once, a letter is skipped, another letter name is given, the student self-corrects after 3 seconds has elapsed, or no letter name is given within 3 seconds. We will now learn about letter word sound fluency.